Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Red Tinted Glasses podcast. We are live. It's Monday night. Well, we hope we can lift the mood. If you're looking for something positive, you've maybe come to the wrong place because recent results have signalled a step backwards in the upturn in fortunes that we thought Jimmy Thelin had here with the Dawn squad. Joining me on the episode, Andy Skinner returns from his trip to Greece, and Phil, as always, alongside me. As I said, lots to discuss on this episode. We'll briefly look back at that trip to Athens that was very unsuccessful, saw the Dons suffer their heaviest European defeat. Another defeat awaited yesterday on Sunday as the Dons went down 2-1 to Hibs, and it's a trip to Ayrshire on Wednesday night as midweek football returns to the Scottish Premiership card. We did say we'd be back on Friday, Phil, but much like the players, we decided we couldn't be arsed putting in a performance after that trip to Athens. Said we'll keep it brief, but what was your thoughts on that disaster on Thursday night?
Painful. First 5 minutes, it was lovely, and then it was just 85 minutes of sheer misery for myself and my Camerons. At least Skinner had a little bit of the Greek sun and gyros to keep him excited.
And plenty of Greek beer, I'm sure. Yeah, I think kind of that just real disappointment. I don't know why I had levels of optimism that we might get a result, sneak a draw. Even seeing the team lineup, I was pretty happy with it. I do feel Topi Keskinen's been scapegoated a little bit and hung out to dry by being played at left wing back and then subbed off early. For me, I don't get it, given that he played Gav Malloy there on the Sunday against St Mirren, to then leave him on the bench, a little bit inexcusable. Shinnie in midfield got a little bit overrun as well. Maybe we saw there that we need a bit of fresher legs for European football in the midfield. But I suppose the biggest disappointment for me was the severe lack of fight and at times effort to keep in the game. I remember our group chat that I'm in saying, if we can just even keep the second half respectable, come away 4-0, yeah, it's disappointing. But, to be 6-0 going on 7 or 8, and to be honest, we were lucky it wasn't 7 or 8 by half time. Skinner said you were over there. See Sam Gordon in the comments as well. He was there as well. Must have been pretty abject, paying all that money to see a performance like that.
Yeah. I will keep it brief because I haven't watched any of it back whatsoever. I've got no interest in doing so, and just quite keen to move on from it, to be honest. But difficult one to really put the finger on because, as Phil mentions correctly, we started so promisingly, and it just seemed as if any Ike Athens attack was something that we were incapable of really showing any resistance to. And I think it was the third goal, was it the one where Mitov passed it out to Milne? And just so many moments in which we did ourselves no favours. A great trip. Everyone was in good spirits beforehand. Gyros and Mythos beer went down fantastically, but by half time, I was already looking ahead to my 6 a.m. flight on Friday, and mercifully, I got a couple of hours kip and managed to catch it. So here we are.
Well, you did manage to do that, so well done for doing that. I think real disappointment on the European stage. I knew we'd had a tough set of fixtures, but the fact it's our inability to kind of perform and continually shoot ourselves in the foot was the real letdown. And said to given some of the performances we've seen on the European stages, even under Barry Robson last time out, it was really disappointing to then go and suffer our heaviest European defeat. And for all the talk of this squad being prepared or learning our lessons from the last time in Europe, we've failed to do so. And then of course we face a Hibernian side on Sunday, Phil. And unfortunately, the good news doesn't even start because the bad news keeps on rolling. It's another defeat. And as someone at my former work wanted to point out, unless we're playing 10 men or Dundee, we don't seem to get positive results this season. And it's definitely really affected the morale of the Aberdeen support on this Monday, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's been a tough, I say a tough week. It's not even been a full week yet. So it can, I would say it can only get better, but at the moment it feels like it can only get worse. But yeah, like you say, I think just Sunday felt like such an important game and such a must win, I think, on the back of the Athens loss. And, as we said in the last episode, it's all about, continually building and try to grasp onto those small pockets of positivity that we can have. But yeah, I mean, after Sunday, it feels like a very sort of toxic and not great place to be in AB24 at the moment. Whether you're a fan, a player, part of the coaching staff, part of the board, whoever it is, it's a very, very tough environment at the moment, and one that, as we'll come on to speak about later, the new director of football is going to have to try and find his feet quickly and as well come 10th of November.
Yeah, I know. I'm sure Hazelhead Petting Corner's already limited his access to that, but we'll definitely come on to that as well. Skinner, I think Phil mentions the atmosphere. It's definitely verging on being toxic. And as Stephen Burns says, 12 months, look who we've beaten when it's been 11v11. And, I actually looked up the last time we played Hibs last season in that 3-3 game, which was the sliding doors moment almost for both clubs, really. And 11 months on, it's probably fair to say, Scottish Cup aside, have things got better since then?
No, I mean, it looked as if the Dundee game was going to be a turning point. We were all delighted with how that played out, and it felt at that point as if, there'd been a build-up to that with the Shakhtar game 3 days prior, and another couple of matches in which, although we weren't getting results, it looked as if, a tweak in the system had solved a lot of problems. On this occasion, it just looked as if we were so easy to play against. Hibs basically resorted to the same tactic throughout the match, or same couple of tactics, should I say. Either, hitting the striker Klidje with a long pass and, basically trusting that he would have the better of whoever he was up against for pace, or just cutting right through the middle of us. And we didn't seem to have the answer for any of that on the day. And that in itself is a very concerning sign that, only a few weeks after we've tweaked formation, already opposing teams are using their strengths to, basically break through that. And I know Hibs are a quick, pacey team, but we need to find ways of making it much more difficult for opposing teams that we come up against.
And Phil, that's probably the biggest concern, because I was going to write it in my notes, and Skinner touches on it there, the fact that the ease at which Hibs played through us. It wasn't so long ago we were on here bumping our gums for Jimmy to change formation, and it feels now we're back being like, well, change it back to make us hard to beat again, because as Andy rightly points out, both AEK and Hibs on Sunday played through us with absolute ease. You just need to look at the second goal where Stuart Armstrong gave many a fan PTSD with his failure to actually just boot the ball. And then again, the second goal yesterday where the ball comes from a Nicky Devlin shot and 2 passes later we're 2-0 down. I can't fathom how it's gone so badly wrong when there felt like there was something there we could build on.
Yeah, I think the concerning thing for me is it's not just that we're easy to play through, it's that we're very easy to play through, as Andy said, right through the middle of our team. And, typically with Hibs, I mean, I've got a note there, Hibs have what we don't, which is just raw pace in their front line. We've seen it when the changes came on, when Eli Yuan and Martin Boyle came on, it just made it even easier for them. And typically you'd expect them to find those pockets out wide, but they were just getting it right through the heart of the pitch all day on Sunday. And I think the problem with this change in the shape and the change in the system is that midfield 2 is so important. And I just don't think we've got a midfield 2 that works. I don't think any of them are mobile enough to be able to cover the amount of ground that's needed at the moment. And I think Palaverse and Armstrong showed that on Sunday. I think neither of them were really that mobile. Neither of them really offered us much penetration. Both of them, for players of their quality, were just really, really frustrating to watch on Sunday for me.
And Skinner, I suppose that's the thing, as Phil mentions there, that midfield too, because we were overrun in the midfield on Thursday night. I said I wondered if Shinnie was maybe a little bit past it. And then he changes that midfield. Okay, keeps Stuart Armstrong, who I thought probably had his worst performance since joining the club in the summer. But Ante Palaversa doesn't really cover himself in glory on Sunday either. I thought Leighton Clarkson looked okay. I know he has his own critics amongst our support as well, but it's very difficult when not only is he struggling to, Jimmy Thelin that is, find his best 11, but that engine room of the team is struggling to find the right fit as well.
Yeah, it was a strange one yesterday because I felt, obviously we saw 3 halftime changes, and I'm sure you were going to come on to that in any case, but I thought I was quite happy with the halftime changes on mass. I thought the 3 players that went off deserved to go off, and I was quite happy to see the 3 that came on given a chance. And then, if anything, the second half actually got infinitely worse than the first. So I think there was just a problem, as Phil and yourself have touched on, with the structure of the team. And we all know that Hibs carry raw pace and a huge threat with guys coming off the bench as well. I just think there was a complete neglect as to what that threat was going to look like on the day and how we were going to combat it. Opposition analysis didn't look like it had been done whatsoever. That's such a big thing in any Premiership level preparation. So that's where just going back to my previous answer, a lot of my concern comes from, is almost that assumption. Although Jimmy has proven that he's capable of changing it, is he capable of doing what's right on a game-to-game basis and finding the right solution based on either who we're playing against or our own circumstances, in this case coming off the back of a chastening defeat in Europe.
It's almost a signal again to me, maybe similar to his early part of his reign as Aberdeen manager, and at times this season, Phil, as well, that once again he doesn't get his starting 11 right. The 3 changes at half time, I mean, as Andy says, I don't know if you agree that you felt that all 3 were right, but it left us very limited. And then we go on to see towards the end of the game when Alfie Dorrington has to play the last 10 minutes with an injury, which potentially has a little bit of an effect on that second goal as well. But it's frustrating that after 62 minutes, that was us out of substitutions yesterday. Yeah.
I mean, I agree with Andy. I think either of Palaversa or Armstrong could have gone off there. I think, it was kind of hard to say for who was the worst out the 2 for he to bring off. So really not opposed to the changes, but I don't know. It was just such a strange one. I mean, Adil Ashish as well. I just didn't really know what he was doing on Sunday or where he was playing. I felt really bad for Malloy because he's I've seen a lot of criticism about his sort of attacking actions in the first half. And I felt like he was basically having to play as a left winger because Ashish just kept on going into these weird narrow pockets of space to try and get on the ball and never receiving it. And then when he does, as Dave Clensport pointed out, really probably should take that chance. Whether it changes the game overall, potentially gives us the momentum and puts us in the driving seat. But yeah, just again, a player that looks like he's just sort of lacking that quality that we're all sort of expecting him to have. Sort of feels like he needs a loan from the loan just to get a little bit of confidence in him. But just a real strange one, especially, as we went on to chase the game and you could see players tiring, Toby Keskinen kind of square peg into round hole once again, getting flung on at left wing back. It just didn't feel like the changes really had much direction about them. I think someone else had put in the comment, it felt like it was just throwing players on for the sake of throwing them on at times, maybe with the exception of Marko Lazetic. But yeah, just a really not great afternoon at all.
Yeah, no, not at all. And that, as you said, David McLennan's comment there about Oshish's chance, and I think the fact he doesn't hit the target probably sums up his time in front of goal on a large part for Aberdeen so far. undoubtedly does change the game. Because obviously it would have set us 1-0 up and forced Hibs to really come at us and maybe change our mentality that we've got something to hold on to. And I think you also then need to look at the Marko Lazetic chance that he has clean through at 1-0. An excellent opportunity. And you just look at his composure versus Eli Yuan, a player that's been really cast aside at Hibs, and how well he does. I do think Mitov sells himself a bit too easily, a la Belarus, to open that up for Yuan to finish. But in the crucial moments, once again, we lacked any belief and self-confidence in the final third. And I think that was a comment you were alluding to there from Graham Gibfill about the substitution, saying, can anyone explain our shape and structure? And I think for me, that was a really largely frustrating point, was that for spells in that second half, I didn't know what our idea was. Again, it's Jimmy Thelin throwing players on and hoping for the best, chasing shadows and chasing a game that we never looked like scoring. And to be honest, much like Thursday night, had Hibs been a little bit more clinical, they could have easily scored 3 or 4. I know they hit the woodwork. I think it was 2 or 3 bodies on the line to deny them at 1-0 as well. And I think apathy is probably where I'm at with this current situation. It feels like, and I suppose Wednesday is really shaping up to be a huge game. And Skinner, I know obviously the seats that you sit in the main stand will be one of attraction as well. And you sit around or near the board, and of course the board set out the football philosophy. And I'm kind of interested to hear both your points on this. But of course, if we reference the club aiming to be that UEFA top 100 club, and the football philosophy that to encompass the 10 key principles of awareness, football mastery, whatever that means, responsibility, positivity, desire, speed, dominating 1v1s, executes under pressure, never beaten, and be heard. Seems like everything this current Aberdeen team is lacking, and raises more questions than answers for me currently. And I'm not just speaking about DNA, because of course that's supposed to invest in the footballing operations. I know a lot of people have questions around the money that we've spent on these project, in inverted comma, players. You know, again, the argument I heard in the pub pre-match was sign project players, get project outcomes. You know, not all the time you're going to hit the bullseye with these players. And the Football Monitoring Board have just as much questions, I think, to answer as much as Jimmy Thelin does. Is that fair, Andy?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, when you reference those, buzzwords, if you like, from, I mean, when even was that published, and how long ago are we talking for that?
Was that not around the Stephen Glass era? It feels
possibly, yeah. I mean, to be honest, it all sounds nice. It's one of those where if the team is doing well, you never really hear about, what was said in that regard, and the talking is done on the pitch kind of thing. On this occasion, I mean, I think the board will be looking at what they've done themselves in regards to where we're at the minute. But ultimately, when you look at what Jimmy has been given to spend, and where the situation we're looking at just now, you wonder what more they could do in order to support him. Where it maybe doesn't add up to me is the right recruitment structure in place to actually, equip him for Scottish football in the way that we would all hope. Are the signings that we're making, the right ones? Clearly some very good players that have come in, some of them for big fees, a lot of expectation on a lot of them. But, is Jimmy been given the tools to actually thrive in a lot of those areas that you speak of there? And that's the bit that I would question. I just think there's been far too much kind of wasted, really. Just a waste of everyone's time, including some of the players that have come in, who have not featured heavily at all. I'm going back a wee while here as well. Not just exclusive to this season. But if you take this season in isolation, I think what I'm concerned about is there's been a lack of jeopardy for some players that have had a right good run at it. We've got a pretty chunky squad on our hands, and Milanovic, take him as an example. Yesterday, I thought when he came on, there were some promising glimpses, but he looked like a guy that hadn't really featured enough to be confident of making an impact in some of the the dangerous areas that we want him to be in. And then you marry that up with someone like Oshish, who's played just about every game and hasn't delivered, and missed 2 chances yet, like one big one yesterday and another one from a decent position outside the box.
I don't also know why Nicholas Milanovic has taken that free kick. I mean, it showed promising signs, but I think also largely showed signs of why he's not played in recent weeks, despite the likes of ourselves maybe being on here asking why he's not. I think there was definitely signs of that. I think, some of the stuff you've said, and I'm also interested to hear what Phil's got to say on the football philosophy as well, because, Phil, Skinner mentions there that the board's backing, and I think it's hard to disagree that the board haven't backed Jimmy Thelin this summer. I know you might get some that say on that comment of project players, well, you've bought a project manager. That was the token gesture. It was, or phrase, I should say, three-year project. Again, another thing that Andy pointed out around the recruitment model. Again, I think we've recruited over the summer. Whether it's worked out or not is open to debate, clearly. But there's been that support there, and unfortunately, for one reason or another, it's not worked out on the pitch. And going back to what you said, it's threatening to turn toxic.
Yeah, and I think Scott Ems hit the nail on the head with his comment around about, we should be mixing these project players with players in their prime. And I was speaking of this the other day with one of my pals, and he'd sort of said that before deadline day, I think the average age of the squad was about 26.5, which I feel like, we need to be getting more of those players that are already a little bit more established, have that experience, which, we thought we were getting with the likes of Stuart Armstrong, who obviously is a fabulous player, didn't really show it on Sunday, but I feel like we're not doing enough of that sort of 26, 27-year-old sort of range of players that are, at their peak per se. We're putting a lot of pressure on these guys like Topi Keskinen, who is coming from the Finnish league. We're putting pressure on, Nick Milanovic to try and come in and do something coming from the A League. A lot of people call him for Mark Jartensen, who's coming from the Icelandic league. These aren't players that have been playing at the the toppest level possible. To come in and kind of make that instant impact. And it is a worry. Jimmy has been backed. I don't think anyone can deny that he's been backed, but I wonder how much of it, is maybe coming from the top. We'll see with the new director of football coming in, how maybe hands-on he is, and whether that maybe does cause an issue for Jimmy. Will they, potentially butt heads? Will that maybe take a little bit of Jimmy's control away from him? Whether that's for the better or worse, I don't know.
Can it get much worse?
Well, exactly. But I mean, the whole thing is everybody's got to be aligned in the direction and the philosophy they're going for. And if they're not, it's just going to cause even more issues. And like you say, it really is teetering on the edge of getting pretty bad. And I know some of my mates were saying that the Red Shed was a little bit of a farce at times on Sunday. A lot of people joining in with the sacked in the morning chants once again. So it's getting to that point where it's becoming difficult, and it's kind of hard to see where it goes from here and how much longer it's sort of attainable.
Yeah, I have to say, I didn't personally, on the side of the Red Shed that I stand on, didn't hear any of those chants, but possibly the fact that as soon as the ball went in the back of the net from LEU, and I was out with the stadium, so maybe those chants started after then. Stephen Wilson's put in a comment that, I've heard also from Stephen Burns today, around Jimmy Thelin will get us relegated because his record over the last year is atrocious, as I've alluded to earlier in the show as well, that, obviously 11 months since that 3-3 draw at Easter Road, and certainly league-wise, our form is diabolical. I'm also not really kind of sure where I sit on the whole let Peter Leven come in and take over, because surely he's just as culpable in this current run of form, because either he's out there implementing what Jimmy wants or is just as involved in that process right now. But is it inconceivable right now, Skinner, to think or mention the R word?
The R word. Sorry, I thought you were taking me down a completely different track there with Peter Leven. Sorry. Well, that's part of what I think has changed the vibe so much off the back of the Hibs game. That was the post-match chatter felt markedly different from any game before. Certainly in the area that I sit in, and I think there's almost a realization that previous narrative of we'll be patient and it'll be fine, it'll turn, has kind of been replaced with, oh, wow, yeah, no, we need to get our act together here, otherwise, we could be in real trouble. Because I think a lot of stock, as I say, was placed on the fact that we'd turned the corner in recent weeks, and that everything was going to just take care of itself from there. I think we've been given a very rude awakening in the last two games, not just the Hibs one. I know Athens are a very, very good side, but there are ways to lose a game, and another big concern for me going into the whole European campaign actually was what the ripple effects of a result like that were going to be on our league form, and we've perhaps seen that case in point. Not that I'm using that as an excuse for what we saw on Sunday, because we should have been more than capable of putting in a better performance than we saw at Pittodrie. But we're early on in this European campaign, and it's looking like there's a danger that could bring us no relief from what looks like a difficult league campaign at this point. It's still got time to turn, of course it does, but we saw a spirited performance against Shakhtar, which came in vain because we didn't pick up any points. But with the way that the European results in general have been shaping up, then there's a genuine risk that we could finish without a point. So
yeah, and I think that's a shame, because I'd be really disappointed for the squad if we somehow finish without a point in Europe. But Phil, on the league form, where do you stand on that R word? Because as Stephen Burns says, we really wanted, and I think it's fair to say, I think the fans have been much more patient than with any other manager, as he goes on to say. I desperately still want Jimmy to be the man that turns this around, but for me, Sunday really felt like the first time where I don't see him doing it, and a little bit Wednesday feels make or break. But I just wonder, you've already mentioned Lutz coming in to the club, but he's not going to be here until mid-November, as Graham Gibbs says. So if Jimmy was to leave between now and Lutz coming in, where does that leave the club?
Yeah, it leaves you in a very sticky position. Like I say, although he's officially got the job, he's not in the role yet. And, we've spoken about before, the worst position for a club to be in is no director of football, no manager. It really leaves you in this horrible limbo state without really much direction on where you're planning to go. I don't know if anyone had sort of seen the Evening Express article about Lutz coming in, and the way it was worded to me read very much like, Jimmy's going to be here until at least he's here. The way it was here to bolster and support Jimmy during this time. So I don't think any rash changes are going to be made until then. In terms of potential relegation, it's certainly relegation form. I don't think anyone can really beat around the bush with that. It's not been great for almost 40 games now. I believe when you look at the league, the it's averaged at about 0.9 points per game. It's not looking pretty from an Aberdeen perspective, but on the flip side, it is a long season, and there's still plenty of football to be played. Obviously, we saw what happened with both Edinburgh clubs last season, and where they ended up come May. So I think it's maybe a bit early to kind of write it off. I've seen a lot of people writing off the season already. There's still plenty of football to be played, but yeah, a bit like yourself, I think on Sunday it was the first sort of time where I just felt like everything was so abject. I felt like nothing was really going to change anything, and I think that
lift
was
the crowd spirits as well, regardless.
Yeah, and I think that was the concern for me, is everybody from the stands to the pitch to the dugout just felt uninterested. And as I've said,
Phil, do you agree with the comment there from Snelder's Gloves that came in kind of at the start of the episode, that they felt we played as individuals on Sunday, in brackets, poorly, and lost all the confidence? Do you think there is that sense of a lack of confidence, whether that's from the players directly with what they're being told, or also maybe a lack of confidence from Jimmy Thelin and himself right now?
I think it's a bit of both. I mean, I think if you were Jimmy in this position, you probably would be doubting yourself. I think it's hard not to, as much as a sort of positive and nonchalant kind of guy that he is. I think the louder outside voices are always going to creep in and kind of make you question what you're doing. I do definitely think it was a team of individuals for majority, if not all of the game on Sunday. And it just doesn't feel like a good thing. Like I said earlier, it's the worst position for a club to be in. No direct football, no coach. Even worse is when everybody looks completely uninterested. That's just going to be a killer. If players aren't playing for you, if the crowd's not getting excited for everything, and the manager can't get himself G'd up to try and get them going, you're just going to be on that downward spiral. And we've spoken about so much that the biggest thing that Jimmy brought to the club and to the city was that unity, and that just didn't feel like it was there at all on Sunday.
No, absolutely right. And I think, the other thing that really kind of killed my feeling towards the game on Sunday, I know it obviously carried a bit of importance, and we spoke last time about what was the more important game of the week. Was it Thursday or was it Sunday? Rightly or wrongly, was the late goals for both Falkirk and Motherwell, because it just extended their gap, that if we had gone on to win on Sunday, we couldn't overtake them or keep that momentum. And it's now created almost like a mini gap between ourselves and Livingston and the rest. But, as David McLennan says, we're only 5 points off of a top 6 place. Other than Hearts, there's no one putting a real run together. And I do think that is a slight saving grace at this moment in time, is that the league is so compact. We saw obviously last weekend with Lazatic's goal, the importance of that, obviously followed up by the fact that Dundee went on to beat Celtic as well. But the league is so tight, and if we can sort this form out and go on a run, we can haul ourselves up the table pretty quickly. But right now, Skinner, do you have faith that we can do that? Because again, on paper, you look at a trip to Rugby Park, it's not exactly the easiest of games coming up.
No, when you talk about the compactness of the table, you can look at that two ways, because it almost lays bare just how poorly we're doing when no one's capable of stringing results together en masse, and yet we're sitting second bottom, a point above bottom spot. That almost, I think it also, when you look at the Edinburgh clubs and when you look at just how much of a mess the Old Firm are just now, that almost makes it all the more galling to see us not being in a position to capitalise, despite the fact that we've invested in the squad and came into the season with nothing other than momentum and euphoria behind us, really, just based on what happened in May. So I get the point about the optics of what happened on Saturday, just changing things, even just psychologically, because yeah, we're ultimately 5 points behind a newly promoted side in Falkirk now, who
Mhm.
occupy the last top 6 place, and that all of a sudden feels like a bit of a gap, even though, as one of the guys pointed out just there, it's still a relatively early stage in the season, and it's not insurmountable. It's just about far too many occurrences in which that run has not looked in any way likely, barring a back-to-back wins over Dundee and St Mirren. We've just not looked like a team.
Those teams in terms of Dundee and St Mirren, again, was having this debate pre-match. It's teams I personally feel that we should be beating if we want to be where the club's aim and ambition is. And Phil, a question more directed at you based on your last comments from Stephen Burns is, do you see Jimmy getting the players going? Because, and it's been picked up a few times by people on social media and in this podcast as well, that he doesn't have that emotional presence on the touchline yesterday, cutting a very glum figure with his hood up in the rain. But do you think that has any sort of effect on the players when your manager's not showing any emotion when the going's getting tough, I suppose?
I think so. I think when you look at who the club turned to as the leaders in the dressing room, Graham Shinney, Nicky Devlin, Dimitar Mitov, all very vocal, kind of old school figures in terms of football, very loud, very physical. I wouldn't be surprised to see things getting broken after a loss like Sunday. And it kind of takes me back to, I can't remember if it was an episode at the start of this season or towards the tail end of last, where I think I'd said to you, Glenn, that my dad made an interesting comment to me once that Jimmy would never make it in the Premier League because he doesn't have the charisma to be a Premier League manager down in England. And I think there is a point to that. I think having a level head in a very calming presence has its benefits at times, but especially on Sunday with the levels of interest I saw from certain players in that park, could do with a very stern boot up the backside. And I suppose a little bit of that old school hairdryer treatment where I just feel that lack of emotion. We've said before at Dundee United away, it was Peter Leven that was up barking the instructions. It just doesn't feel like there's that sort of stern side to the leadership for Jimmy. And I think you have to have a little bit of both, especially when it comes to managing at a club like Aberdeen.
Yeah, and I do wonder kind of where that dynamic works with both Jimmy and Peter, and who's the good cop, bad cop, almost. And as much as Jimmy Thellin's obviously going to come in for a lot of flack, I think I've already mentioned that the board will rightly receive some, and I know there will be some if things don't work out for Jimmy Thelin, that fans won't have the faith in Cormac and Burrows to make the right, in inverted commas, appointment next time. But it would be, once again, for me, when do the players accept any form of responsibility or are held to any form of, using the football philosophy, accountability for their part in getting yet another manager sacked? And you come back to the comment, Andy, about the project players that I made. This squad has plenty of experienced players that should help the so-called project players. I'm counting Mitov in that. You've got Nicky Devlin, who, as I think Sam Gordon pointed out in the comments, says it all when he's our most attacking player for large spells at this moment in time. Kevin Nisbet, he is an experienced player. Regardless if he's getting the service or not, he needs to be there. He's voted player of the year last season, so clearly viewed as an integral part of that dressing room. Across the midfield, you've got Nielsen, Shinney. They're experienced players as well. There is plenty of experience in there, quality I was going to say, but we'll leave that open to debate, to guide and nurture the project players and the younger players into forming what should be a good side. Because, again, open for debate, this team does have quality about it. Unfortunately, right now, we're not seeing it in abundance, and the results also aren't forthcoming.
Yeah, and you mentioned the word experience there, but the experience that you talk of off the top of my head from the players that you mentioned there, I think just about all of them have been there since the very start of Jimmy's reign. So it's not as if it's a group of players that are unfamiliar with that demeanour that's been mentioned by Phil earlier on, where he is a little bit standoffish on the touchline. He'll never change, I don't suspect.
No.
Whether rain or shine, in yesterday's case it was incessant rain,
Yeah.
and metaphorically in terms of what's going on in the pitch, I think we'll see the same version of Jimmy, and the same goes for his demeanour in post-match interviews. And as I say, players, a good chunk of the squad is perfectly familiar with that. They know how he works, they know how he operates, and so that shouldn't be really, treated as an excuse or a fundamental factor behind our current struggles. The dynamic with Leaving is an interesting one, because obviously I do sit quite near the dugout, and yeah, I mean, it does appear to be Leaving that provides instructions to players individually. He's the active presence on the dugout. I mean, Jimmy does stand quite firmly at the front of things, but Peter is the one that's more actively in dialogue with players. And you raised a point earlier on about whether he's just as culpable because he's associated with the management team in that regard. I guess when you look at that situation, he's not employed to be the decision maker. He has to conform to the instructions he's given by Jimmy Thelin. He has to play the right hand man role in trying to execute the plan, and I suppose he'll also be at the mercy of whatever responsibility he's given as well. It might be the case that he's given a lot of authority, a lot of trust on the training ground and all the rest of it. It might be the opposite. I'm not entirely privy to how that dynamic works, but I certainly think, as I say, given the experience we've got in the squad, not just in terms of football years, but within the current setup at Aberdeen, there should be no excuse whatsoever for any misunderstanding as to what is being asked of the players. And with that in mind, I agree entirely with the point that you make, that players should be held to account for what's going on.
I mean, as I said, at the end of the day, I think they do need to take some flack. Phil, I'm sure at the Player of the Year, Graham Shinney spoke about that. Even under the Neil Warnock part of last season, that the players did have to take some accountability. But again, seeing some of the comments that are coming in, and I know maybe we're speaking as if the writing's on the wall for Jimmy Thelin. It kind of feels a little bit of that. But it's really disappointing to see how we've failed to build on the momentum and the success of that cup win in May. And obviously, for probably all three of us, in terms of footballing aspects, the best day of our lives. And I'll never not be thankful for Jimmy Thelin for giving us that day in May at Hampden. And I really don't want that legacy and that day to be tarnished by the current form we're on in the league. And again, going back to what you've mentioned in terms of the toxic nature that Pittodrie could become, I think Graham Gibb used the word poisonous in the comments as well. It's getting to that point where I don't want it to end in that manner for Jimmy. I want him to still go out with dignity. I don't know if that's the right word, but his head held high for what he has achieved here and what success he did bring in that short time.
Yeah, no, just going back to your first point around the sort of players almost being insulated from the sort of flack. I mean, we've seen how often the likes of Meatov, Devlin, Shinney, whoever, Palaversa, whoever they put out in front of the cameras, talks a big game and it falls apart on the pitch. And I think, they're equally as culpable in this. Their actions need to back up their words, and right now, majority of them are not filling that adequately enough. But yeah, I mean, I think everyone will be thankful for what Jimmy's done. You know, that cup final will stay with a lot of us. But as I said earlier, I just don't quite know where we go from here. I just can't see it improving just based on, you know, the combination of the start of the season and then throwing in, you know, the recent results in Athens and against Hibs. It just feels like you say, you want him to almost go out on his terms. You know, I've seen a little bit of conversation in the comments about, you know, Jimmy potentially offering to go, and it kind of feels like we should let him go on those terms. Somebody had mentioned, you know, how poor it was at the tail end of the Glass and Goodwin eras, and just how dreadful a place it was to come to Pittodrie on a Saturday and not only witness the terrible football, but witness the likes of Jim Goodwin hopping over advertising boards. And I don't want it to get to that point with Jimmy. I think he's earned a bit more than that, to be able to go out and like I said, I think just with the director of football coming in, it kind of feels like that might potentially be the trigger point. Like I'd said earlier, is Jimmy, you know, I don't know behind the scenes, but is Jimmy a coach that likes a bit more control, and is that going to be taken away from him when Lutz comes in? Are they going to be aligned with the direction the pair of them want to go with the squad for the future, for the season, whatever it might be? And, you know, will that clash, if there is to be one, kind of be the straw that breaks the camel's back and sends Jimmy back to Sweden? It's tough to say, but yeah, I would like to see him go out with, like, say, a shred of that dignity left.
I think, as you said, it's the least he deserves for the success he brought. But as you said, Sunday kind of throws into question marks about where do we go from here. Well, the answer to that question is Rugby Park on Wednesday night. And the one thing I don't want to see is another kind of capitulation, because that kind of feels like it's been a bit of the hallmarks of this season, is when we concede one, we concede two, the heads go down, the ideas, the understanding goes very quickly out the window, and that's, for me, the disappointment. I will come back to your point about, do things change now that Lutz is coming in, and get both of your thoughts on the arrival of the new director of football. And yeah, I did see that comment on social media about the you know, Jimmy Thelin allegedly offering to go, and whether or not, how much truth is in that, I'm not sure, but knowing the person that posted it is normally a very good source of information as well. So maybe there is a degree of truth in that. But to use the phrase that Phil said there, Andy, the straw that breaks the camel's back, could defeat in Ayrshire on Wednesday night potentially be that for Jimmy Thelin in his time at Aberdeen? Or certainly maybe for some of those fans that are still behind him.
Yeah, whether he goes or not, then it could be a turning point for fans. I mean, I think it plausibly could. I don't know if it will. You know, I'm not privy to information in that regard as to whether Jimmy has, you know, a trip to Ayrshire to save his job. As I say, I wouldn't be overly surprised if, particularly if, you know, depending on the manner of the result, if it is one of those capitulations.
As Graham says, it's not the defeats, it's the manner of them.
The manner, yeah, that's everything. I mean, we've had some horror shows down at Rugby Park in recent times. Was it under Jimmy that we took a 4-0 down there, I think? Or was that previous season? Around about Christmas time? Yeah. Yeah, and it feels quite similar to the Dundee United game that we had recently, actually, just because that felt like a bit of a must-win game where, you know, all the talk beforehand in the press, as Phil alluded to, had been, you know, quite noisy about how it had to change, and that, you know, everything was going to be geared to, you know, stepping up where it counted at Tannadice, and the complete opposite happened. So if there was to be a repeat of that, then bearing in mind we don't play again for another week, and don't play in the league again for another 10 days, then, you know, that can be a vulnerable time for managers, you know, when there is that gap.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously, I mean, you could look at it, it offers us prime opportunity to prepare for that Larnaca game which I don't know how excited you are for that now, Phil. But does Wednesday night's game have that shades of the Tannadice game? I know you were there at Tannadice, and there was evidence of fans showing their disappointment. And I was listening to Andy's friend, and he's been on the show before, Michael Grant on sports, BBC Scotland this morning, saying that there is the pressure there for Jimmy Thelin. The fans are growing frustrated, and I do feel defeat, especially on Wednesday night, is, for me, I'm already feeling that apathy towards certainly this league season. That'll just continue to grow if we fail to get 3 points. I think right now, even for me, a draw probably doesn't do much for me.
Yeah, I think, again, it'll be a case of everybody associated with the club needs to kind of come out in sort of, actions speak louder than words type style to really show the care, show that they're, all in for it, and there is the potential for it to turn around. And like you say, I think the more that pressure mounts on Jimmy, the more that pressure then switches over to Cormac and Burrows as well. I saw comments saying that Cormac's heart was to sank with the sort of mass exodus at 2-0, and it's almost like you feel like there could be a Celtic style Aberdeen collective en route where there's not a penny going in, boycotting companies, etc. I don't think we'll ever get to that stage, but it would be quite interesting. But Rugby Park on Wednesday night just feels huge now. It's a tough place to go. There'll be a sticky side, and I think this season it's just been a team that struggles to score and struggles to defend. So going to Rugby Park is going to be a tough test. They're going to be tough to break down. They've got that big 6'6" striker that looks quite handy as well. Could cause us some problems. So yeah, I'd like to say I think I'm in the same sort of boat where that apathy is creeping in, and I'm struggling to kind of get that excitement going for Wednesday. Obviously not going down, because I think Ayrshire on a Wednesday night would be even worse should we throw a loss on top of it as well. So I will happily keep up to date with the commentary in the comfort of my home.
Yeah, well, we might have to break the glass for an emergency podcast if things don't go to plan, or maybe we can even jump on and do a live reaction. We'll see just how bad it is. But I think that's
or good, Glenn. It could be a live reaction to a 6-0, or it could be sliding doors.
Well, have you been drinking on a Monday night, Phil? I think that 6'6" striker that you referred to, I'm pretty sure he got injured on the last international break. So it's just Bruce Anderson to lead the line to cause us problems, I'm sure. Sticky side, you mentioned, sticky pitch, I'm sure, the plastic on Wednesday night as well. Surprisingly, maybe the bookies making us favourites for the game, but in terms of the team, Andy, I think we're likely to see changes. Obviously, Alfie Dorrington was carrying a knock. I know he asked to be subbed. He's going for a scan this week, so I think it's pretty much certain he won't play on Wednesday night. Gyamfi, well, by all accounts, is struggling with a hamstring. I don't see that being risked on a plastic pitch. So I expect changes to be made to the defence. The midfield we've discussed is an area of the pitch where we've seen being overrun, not working. What for you potentially is the ideal midfield and front line to, as Phil said, hopefully give us the win on Wednesday?
I would like to see Leighton Clarkson in from the start. I think that's been on ice for far too long. Maybe given the physicality that we're going to be coming up against, you could maybe throw Dante in as a wild card as well. Just for something, again, just changing it and doing something different to what's been going on before. We're coming up against a side that, I mean, I caught the highlights at the weekend, and I noticed Stuart Kettlewell being highly critical of Killy's defending, not just in the defeat at Ibrox, but the previous two games. They lost 3 at home to Hearts in the last game before that as well. So that looks to me like a team that's going to be looking to address defensive problems as a key focus in training in the early part of this week. They
we
might
need to
look
prove in the
upon
final third to even threaten that.
Yeah, I was a way to say you can look at that both ways because, yes, we might be coming up against a team that's shaky in terms of confidence that way, but they might also look at it, coming up against a beleaguered Aberdeen side and see it as a perfect opportunity to address their own struggles. They've been an effective team to this point this season. It's just been a recent little blip that they've suffered. It wasn't that long ago they were sitting third in the league. So, I don't foresee a straightforward evening whatsoever. Equally, there's no excuse for a below par performance given what's at stake for us and potential consequences of a poor night. Hopefully, changes in the team and changes in just the dynamic from the start as well. It could be a change of system again that worked for us previously. We'll just have to wait and see in that regard, but definitely a change in approach and attitude, mentality, call it what you want.
Well, I mean, I think that change is an absolute given and an expectance from the fans. And Phil, a lot of people in the comments throughout the show here on YouTube tonight, and I'm sure maybe continued once it's posted, have called for the likes of Mitchell Frame to come in to the picture. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. It's been on my mind all day. But also, there's also been calls for Dylan Lobben at right wing back, given Alexander Jensen's performances so far this season. Ross Duncan mentioning Kjartansson potentially in that midfield as well. I'm asking you because I know you're an advocate to see the young players get given their chance, but given the run of form and the importance really that Wednesday night has, is it the right time to give those players a chance?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one because, like you say, I'm always the sort of advocate of if you're good enough, you're old enough. I don't think whether you're 18 or 38 should impact on, whether you should be getting into the squad. But I also think putting them in when we're in this sort of run, it could be quite detrimental. Obviously, it puts them under pressure. They have a bad game, we lose, it knocks them back. I think this is where it was a little bit frustrating not to see some more of the younger players getting that involvement last season when things were going well, or even, when the season was sort of wrapped up and we could get them involved, like we saw with Fletcher, sort of the season prior, getting those opportunities in the league. So it's a tough one, but, on the other foot, are they really going to do much worse than what we've seen at times?
And as Kirstine says, they've got something to prove as well, potentially.
Yeah, exactly. You've mentioned Lobben, a player that recently signed a new deal, has very high expectations, clearly very thought of by those around the club. Jensen's not been the greatest. As you said at the top of the show, I felt, similar to you, Topi was sort of hung out to dry when it felt like all the goals came down whatever side Jensen was playing on, whether he was at right back or moved to left back. So whether that is a change that gets made, I know that Kjartansson's kind of been flirting with potentially getting those first minutes, whether it's been down to injury or Jimmy sort of having a last minute change of mind will be interesting. I noticed on Sunday as well, Cassini Yengi either warming up or cooling down on his own pre-match. So whether he's maybe in for a shot, he certainly looked a lot more mobile in his half-pitch sprints than Kevin Nisbet did in his sort of hour cameo on Sunday. So I think I can see there being a few changes in that squad. I think there has to be. I think there's too often kind of favourites which Jimmy gets labelled with, and I think that kind of game plan's got to go out the window. Something's got to change, and at the moment the only real change can make is in the starting lineup or the shape or system. So I can see something being different on Wednesday night for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of you also speaking about the formation as well. Scott M going for the 4-3-3 with a narrow midfield, the wingers dropping back to make it a 5 in midfield when defending. Stephen Burns wants a 4-4-2. Forget the wing back stuff. And I think there was someone in the comments as well. Yeah, John Kilo saying he feels sorry for Gav Malloy, who's a centre back, being asked to play as more of a left winger in that left wing back role. Like, I thought he was good against Morton in that role, but then it's Morton, not your higher class opposition, with the greatest of respect to my pals from Greenock on that one as well. And then, we're speaking about the young players, but as Ross Duncan points out, Ambrose has been scoring for the development team. So when's he getting his chance if we're speaking about the young players that are impressing? So yeah, we'll leave that one for another day and wait and see what the team news is. I suppose then just final thoughts really is obviously the new director of football has been announced. Andy, he'll take up position in November. Thoughts on the appointment? Obviously Derek Ray has been very vocal on the success of it, and he feels it's a very good appointment. I know the club I've mentioned the success he had at St. Louis as well, and what he brought there. So certainly from the snips you read on terms of what he achieved in terms of the footballing side, not his other life, does give a lot of positivity. And unfortunately on the pitch there isn't that positivity. Hopefully the two can mirror up sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I think for what it looks like, just based on recent recruitment strategies, recent transfer windows, given what we're looking to try and do, it seems to me like quite a good fit, something that marries up with that. Because it's been mentioned on numerous occasions this season just how much at times we perhaps lack a Scottish backbone, and that's sometimes unfair. I think we started the game yesterday with 5 Scottish players, which it's not quite what it used to be. It's equally not what Dundee United did in Europe at the start of this season, and it's not a xenophobic point in any way. It's more just trying to create that balance where you've maybe got players in the side that know and expect what they're going to face in the Scottish Premiership, and mix that in with a bit of flair and perhaps fearlessness from players that are signed from overseas who are just coming with a fresh mentality completely. In the case of Lutz, who it's well documented, he's played in all 6 continents and has travelled the world in footballing terms. It looks as if he'll have a good eye to creating a strategy that can work in Scotland but also draw on influences overseas. Perhaps that's the part of it that has been lacking a little bit, just that guiding figure, because I think this is probably the byproduct or the product even of the big footballing strategic review that we did a couple of years ago, the report that was done. And I think the sporting director role was actually pinpointed as being probably the biggest priority in terms of what we were lacking as a club at that point. He's clearly been on the radar for a long time. He's been to the Northeast and attended matches as a guest of the club. I believe other candidates that were in for this did likewise. I think it was a requirement for the role that they actually spent a bit of time in and around the club in order to have a serious discussion about what they would offer as a potential sporting director or director of football. So I think there was a genuine process. It wasn't going to be Lutz every day of the week, but clearly he's been someone that's been on the radar a while and emerged as the front runner. So I suppose it's something that's been mentioned by Thelin on the podcast tonight prior, as to the burning question being, how does his arrival affect the dynamic with Jimmy? And that's perhaps the bigger question as to how receptive Jimmy will be to a new arrival coming in, and whether that changes from what we're seeing currently in place.
Yeah, I
but
suppose.
no, certainly I'm glad that it's been resolved and we've got some form of forward plan now to take this on.
Well, it's one box ticked in terms of the backroom staff or the behind the scenes staff that we've been promised for a long time. And Phil, I suppose, as you've said, it is going to be interesting to see how Jimmy responds to operating under that sporting director. How involved, if at all, was Jimmy in the process, and what does Lutz think of Jimmy? I think he's certainly going to have the contacts, as Andy says, having played and worked across the world as well. And when you've got Derek Ray really fangirling you to that extent, he is a very respected voice within the footballing world, especially the German footballing world. And we know what, can be achieved and how success is measured over there. So he's coming with a lot of respect on his CV. Interesting to see what he's going to bring.
Yeah, and I mean, I think Lutz was involved with the company that ran our sort of audit as well. So, it seems like it certainly makes sense that he's maybe the top pick if he aligns with, being able to right the wrongs that they've pointed out in their report. So it'll be interesting. I think it's quite nice to just have a proper head case by the looks of things as well involved with the club. I don't think he's really going to worry about upsetting people at our club or any other club for that matter. I think he's going to be very straight talking and just kind of say it how it is, which I think a lot of people might need at times. So I mean, it's, I suppose, on the back of what's been quite a miserable week from a footballing perspective, it is nice to kind of have a little bit of that excitement, and I suppose something to slightly look forward to in the way that he's going to sort of handle his affairs in his new role. So, and like Andy said, it's just nice to have that kind of unknown squared off just now, and maybe we can, maybe that is what was needed for us to be able to focus more on matters at hand, closer at home.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as you said, some good positive news, albeit off the pitch, potentially a little bit of a smokescreen to what else has been going on the pitch. But if it's part of the process or the project to aligning us to go in the right direction in the league and on the pitch, then, yeah, it feels right now a slow process. But that's where we are under Cormac and Burrows at this stage. Everything has taken its time, and hopefully the good results on the pitch don't take their time to come back, and Wednesday would be the perfect place to start with 3 points. And myself and Phil will be back to review that action from Rugby Park, success or failure, and whatever that looks like. Of course, we then have some time between that game and the trip to Larnaca, but we will get a show out before Phil jets off to sunnier climes to support the Dons in Cyprus. But to those that have supported the show tonight here live on the YouTube channel, thank you very much for sticking with us. As I said, it wasn't going to be a podcast full of positivity, hopefully not too negative for those that don't like that tone. But times are tough, and there is some tough discussions, I'm sure, needed to be had, not just on this podcast, but also in the boardroom at AB24. So until next time, we'll see you all then.